G'day and welcome. I'm Second Sonic and I'm an Aussie doctor who plays Magic the Gathering. I recently made my first ever top 4 in a major tournament, reaching the semi-finals of the ESL ANZ Championships Season 2 with Simic Ramp. I've been wanting to start a YouTube channel about jank and off-meta decks for a while and figured this was as good a time to start as any. My first video will be a run through the deck followed by a tournament clip including a pre-match interview, deck analysis, and my quarterfinal match against former Players Tour and GP Melbourne finalist Dennis Chan playing Izzet Epiphany. If you enjoy the content, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. Oh, and just before we dive in, I'll be giving away an MTG Arena code like this one in each of my videos. So this deck is centered around Hullbreaker Horror, a 7-mana blue creature, Kraken Horror, with flash, cannot be countered, and whenever you cast a spell, either return a spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If we can resolve this, with mana open, we can just about lock our opponent out of the game. To achieve this early, we utilize creatures with ramp, such as Neverwinter Dryad, which costs 1 mana, and for 2 mana and a sacrifice, you can search your library for a basic forest card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. In addition, Quandrix Cultivator for 4 mana lets you search your library for a basic forest or island card and put it onto the battlefield untapped. But the highlight of this deck is the Snow package. Sculptor of Winter, a 2-mana mana dork, which lets you untap a snowland by tapping itself. And the highlight, Jorn Snow of Winter, which whenever it attacks, untaps all snow permanents that you control, including all of your snowlands, Sculptor of Winter, and himself. In order to protect our Hullbreaker Horror after it resolves, we have 12 1-mana instants, including a full playset of Consider, which can help search for another instant, or dig through your library to find Hullbreaker in the early game, Fading Hope to stall your opponent, and filter your cards in your deck, and Snakeskin Veil to protect Hullbreaker Horror, but also other creatures in your deck, particularly Jorn God of Winter, floating mana from Sculptor of Winter, turn 3, or Quandrix Cultivator, from the land that it fetches on turn 4. Divide by Zero provides additional stalling, as well as access to a lesson package in our sideboard, which includes Environmental Sciences to search for lands, Teaching of the Archaics to draw cards, Containment Breach as artifact and enchantment removal, and Mascot Exhibition to create a board. As part of our lands, we run 2 copies of Glasspool Mimic, which can copy Hullbreaker Horror and, together with a 1-mana instant, can hardlock your opponent out of the game. Memory Deluge helps us dig for Hullbreaker Horror, and Lier gives us access to all the instants that we have played during the game to search for Hullbreaker Horror, now able to protect him. For our lands, we run 2 copies of Hall of Storm Giants as a potent alternate finisher, snow-covered islands and forests, a few dual lands, and Faceless Haven. In a magical Christmas land, we play Sculptor of Winter on turn 2, Jorn on turn 3, possibly with a Snakeskin Veil to protect him, and in response to his attack, on turn 4, we tap all our snow permanents, let the trigger on Jorn resolve, and flash in Hullbreaker Horror with mana up. For our sideboard, we run Tangled Trap to remove pesky flyers and artifacts. Imrith, Desert Doom, as an additional threat that can block flyers such as Goldspan Dragons and Ashmouth Dragons. Another copy of Lier, if we want to play the long game with lots of recurrent value, noting that we sideboard out Lier if our opponent decides to side in discard. Now, knowing the field I was up against for this tournament, my sideboard had a heavy suit of counterspells, including 2 Wash Away, specifically to counter Aaron's Epiphany, 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke, and 2 copies of Test of Talents to remove threats permanently from the opponent's deck, as well as have a look at their cards. Just remember, make sure you side out Lier if you're bringing in a whole suit of counterspells, as he can be quite a liability. The silver bullet in this deck against go-wide aggro decks is Consuming Tide. For only 4 mana, we can return all but one of your opponent's non-land permanents to their hand, and even keep one of yours. For example, Hullbreaker Horror. Not only that, you usually draw a card from it too. Alright, so let's get into the tournament clip.
Just gives us that little bit of extra insight. We might be able to get a little bit more of that as well here from Second Sonic as we bring him back here onto the desk and have a chat to him ahead of the championship series. So Second Sonic, mate, it is good to have another chat to you here in another top 8 for ANZ Champs. Now, this deck that you've brought in is this, kind of blue-green kind of ramp deck. It's not something that we've personally seen so far on the deck. So is this something that you've played in maybe some of the opens that you just didn't quite make it to the top 8s? Or is this something that's, a little bit of a homebrew concoctions that you feel like can take out the champion stage?
So this was a result of a bit of a brainstorming session I had with my mates. We sort of took the most broken card in Standard, which is Hullbreaker Horror, and we thought, how can we break it even more? So we figured Ramp was the way to get it out early, but then we were finding that even with Ramp, it wasn't getting on the board fast enough. And that's when someone suggested Jorn as a way to basically hyper Ramp the Hullbreaker Horror out so it can come down on like turn 4 or turn 5 and just in an ideal world try and end the game as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I had 2 questions for you. The first one was like, is it the case that it seems like you want to just build a lot of your decks around the one card? Because I remember you had your werewolf card as well that you wanted to pop off, and now you're trying to make the horror pop off. And I also wanted to ask, yeah, obviously you switched decks from what you were bringing previously. I remember you were playing a bit of a different deck. So how are you feeling the switch has gone for you looking at the field now?
I think it's fairly well positioned. I guess with the aim with this deck is I don't really care about what my opponent is playing because I try to end the game as fast as possible. So I guess a slower deck is probably more favorable for me because I guess an aggro deck can run me over even before turn 4 or turn 5.
All right, well, look, I'm really intrigued by this deck. I remember seeing a few shells like this running around to try and ramp out Coma, but I agree, Hullbreaker Horror, potentially an even more powerful threat to play early. Do you see yourself as well positioned in this Is It matchup? Because I would have you favored, but it seems like your opponent is confident going up against you.
I'm not going to lie, Is It is a very difficult matchup, I think, for any deck. But I was anticipating an Is It matchup, especially for my first opponent who seemed to have been playing Is It through all the qualifiers. So that's what I've mainly been practicing in. Yeah, it's quite a complicated matchup, and I've gotten a lot of insight from playtesting.
Okay, so it seems like everybody's, put in the hard yards here for the championship stage, and I'm super excited to see how this deck does pan out second Sonic, so good luck for your series here up against Dennis.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. I mean, I've seen a lot of these kind of deck theories been floating around, and it seems like there's been a lot of playtesting that has gone into this Pilski, and I'm just excited to see if we ever get a match where it is going to be that turn 4 horror and see whether or not Dennis can deal with something that fast and that hits that hard.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's always satisfying, but also painful when you get these decks that they curve out and they just do exactly what you want to be doing. And that's whenever you're bringing decks like that that are utilizing some very, very powerful cards, there's always the potential that you can just hit that a bunch and win yourself a tournament if you're doing it enough. So we'll see if that pans out for him, or whether the consistency of how much we've seen will benefit Dennis, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess that's a question that we're going to have answered at the end of this series. And I know there's a question for you guys in chat as well. Can you predict who you think is going to win this series? It is time for the Dare fan vote, ladies and gentlemen. Do you feel like Dennis has what it takes here to get himself into a top 4 and try and flow out the story that he's written in front of us here in the interview? Or do we feel like that second Sonic has come across some little extra spice for ANZ Champs in the championship stage? It is for the entire series, not just each map. So please do keep that in mind when you are predicting for the Dare fan vote. Lads, it is time to talk about our own predictions right now. Pilski still streaking ahead. Unfortunately for Formal, he has been caught up by Chris, so there is now a very interesting kind of dynamic that we've got there at the bottom. And Bart, as we start to roll through these predictions right now, I just want you to talk through your second Sonic pick here and why you feel like this might come out on top.
Well, part of the reason I picked second Sonic is just because I knew that Pilski was going to pick Dennis, and I have to catch him up a game sometime. He keeps picking the same thing as me, so there's no way I'm going to be able to overhaul his lead if I don't try and make a break at some point, and I figured exploiting his deep love of Dennis would be one way to do that. But I do genuinely believe in second Sonic. I feel like regardless of, what he said in the interview, maybe he was playing a bit coy, but you don't bring an out-of-meta deck to this event unless you think it beats Izzet, because that's going to be the most common deck. It's the most powerful deck in the meta, and out of it in mono green, I'd argue most of these players likely respect their own ability to play a deck like Izzet. So I think this blue-green ramp deck has the edge. Maybe not the turn 4 horror is the key, but because it's just too vulnerable to disruption. The turn 5 horror holding up multiple mana could be such a problem. Like you can play Jorn on turn 4 holding up Snakeskin Veil, and then if they can't remove that, you get to play horror plus multiple spells next turn. It's a really explosive threat. You've also got the Glasspool Mimics, which can come down as discount horrors if your opponent tries to sort of play reactively. There's the 1 mana interaction in this deck is very potent, but the problem is that it's not actually useful interaction unless you have that key threat, and horror is really the only key threat main board, so maybe you have to mulligan hard to it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's really going to be a question that we're going to have to answer across this series, is whether or not it is all just going to be centered around this Hullbreaker Horror, or whether or not going to try and play off things like, get that early bit of damage in with the Faceless Havens and even a whole of the Storm Giants, and then as that Hullbreaker Horror gets dropped down, that's when it really becomes multiple threats. And the kind of cerebral version of Magic the Gathering. That's why I like having these best of 3. That's why I like getting these players that are such big brains and come into the champion stage, because they need to put everything on the line. They need to get everything done here to move forward. Is it going to be Dennis? Is it going to be second Sonic? Let's find out with Pilski and Bard.
Alrighty, well, we're getting into the thick of the day now, getting to the ends of the quarterfinals and things like that, and we're seeing our bracket shape up more and more. So definitely key to see who's going to be advancing from this one, because I think whoever's going to be going up against him has got to worry about things like horror, and already second Sonic has got the cat cam going, ready to go. So he's getting some advice on the mulligan. Cat says yes, that's a great hand, and he will be holding on to it.
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because that's the thing. When I look at this deck, I think, okay, you can beat the Izzet deck, but you're kind of all in on the chain of ramp into the horror. Because if you don't have the horror and you don't have the horror quickly, it feels like your deck's too one-dimensional, and it's too easy for the Izzet deck to handle you once its resources are in place. But second Sonic, he said, oh, I've gained a lot of insight. It's actually a more complicated matchup. And so, that's kind of what I was hoping to hear, right? Because I'm interested to see, can he play a slower game? He seems perfectly happy to, based on that keep. So we'll have to find out what that looks like. What other threats can you really bring into play that will force Dennis to kind of leave himself open for a slower horror?
I mean, it's looking good, dude. Like, you got him with the Dryad here. He can get some more land going. He's got the Sculptor ready to go as well. So he's hitting all of these early drops and sort of chaining things together into things like Jorn, or he's got the Lier already ready to go in the hand. He's got the Cultivator. So things are looking not too bad for Second Sonic. How are you feeling about Dennis's hand?
Well, I think Dennis kept his hand. He had, on the strength of his removal, he has only, I believe, the 3 targeted damage-based removal spells in the main deck, which is not like an unusually low or high amount. You know, 1 Abrade, I believe, or 1 Abrade and 2 Demon Bolts. So he's well equipped to deal with these small early creatures and slow down Dennis's ramp, which is probably the most important thing, especially in his mind, right? Maybe Dennis, maybe Second Sonic is sort of confident in his backup plans, but I'm sure Dennis is just counting down the potential Hullbreaker Horror clock in his mind and trying to slow it down as much as he can. He does also have the Fading Hope, like the 7 bounce spells in the deck are going to be obviously key since they actually deal with the horror. And here's Jorn. So Jorn was able to dodge the Abrade, but unfortunately for Second Sonic, Dennis has that second removal spell ready to go. And since people haven't seen Jorn very much over the course of this series, I'll just quickly mention why this card is so important, right? It does have 2 sides. I don't think this deck can even cast the back side of it since you need black mana, but that doesn't really matter. The important side is on the front, a 3/3. Whenever it attacks, it untaps each snow permanent you control. So it untaps itself, so Zelda has pseudo vigilance. It untaps your other snow creatures, like your Sculptors of Winter, but also untaps all your lands. And normally, because that happens in the middle of combat, that's not so bad for your opponent. It means you get to play a couple of small spells. But Hullbreaker Horror has Flash, so that means you can go to combat, tap 4 lands for 4 mana, attack with Jorn, untap everything, tap it again with all the mana still in the pool, and cast an incredibly early Hullbreaker Horror. That is kind of what we're shooting for here, but Second Sonic didn't keep a hand that really plays towards that, so I guess we have something different in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to get the Dream Opener and just hit everything, but I think both of these players were admitting to the fact that it's a bit more of a complicated matchup, and Dennis already, one of the win conditions he talked about was slowing down his opponent, bouncing things like the Jorn pack, and just making his opponent more uncomfortable and putting more turns between him and the dream sort of hand or the dream combination of cards here for Second Sonic. So I don't know, I'm not really feeling like either one of these players are too far ahead of the other. They're both sort of feeling their way out, and we're still waiting to see what the next couple of cards will tell us. Yeah,
it's a really interesting kind of matchup because Second Sonic is basically playing a tempo deck here. It's a very weird kind of deck, because typically the tempo deck you'd imagine is like, I'm going to play a threat, an aggressive creature that has good ability to kill you that only costs 1 or 2 mana, and then I'm going to protect it the rest of the game. So you see lots of doing nothing and then a flurry of activity, and most of the rest of the game is around setting up that turn so that your opponent can't effectively respond. Whereas right now, I guess what we're doing, Second Sonic, is sort of testing Dennis's interaction, right? You're using removal to slow down a potential horror, but Sonic doesn't even have the horror available. He's just sort of letting you play stuff and slowly building up his land. So whatever his plan involves, maybe he's hoping to sort of chip away at Dennis's life and then catch him out on a surprise lethal turn, because if you're always trying to respect the horror, that naturally means you're probably going to not prioritize killing, say, this Quandrix Cultivator, but it's a 3/4. Like, it'll get you before you know it.
Yeah, not too bad of a couple of minions, at least in terms of representing the power on the board, and just chipping in damage. Every little bit helps, especially when you don't want to be necessarily leaning on those very, very strong win conditions just to be able to leverage yourself a win.
Yeah, so now we're seeing, I mean, we've got Consider in hand now for Second Sonic. He's just chipping away, but hopefully he's able to draw into slightly more pressure here, because I'm worried that he might just get overtaken by the combo. I think the saving grace right now is that Dennis just doesn't have an Epiphany. So that's because that's the big concern, right? Is the Second Sonic can chip away at the life total here, but as we've seen, the Epiphany deck really doesn't care how much life there is. So long as it gets that combo off, and with the iteration in hand, you have to be concerned about, Epiphany, untap, copied Epiphany, you're dead.
Alright, well, still representing a reasonable board of power here is Second Sonic, and yeah, 7 damage with 13 HP for Dennis is nothing to scoff at. He's gonna cast himself a Behold the Multiverse as well as the Galvanic. So we're going to be looking through a lot of cards and trying to improve the quality of our hand and cycle through our deck to try to find something valuable.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a good sign if you're second Sonic, because unless your opponent is basically like so far ahead that they're just like, yeah, I'll just chuck this stuff out. Them spending this many resources to build a hand means that you've at least gotten them to accept, I need to make decisive plays soon. You know, I can't just sit here and sort of durdle around. I need to find good cards or at least more interaction. And so second Sonic, you know, the fact that your ramp spells, like, this is not usual, right? You think of a ramp deck, you think it's either just sort of putting lands into play and has no board, or it's got stuff like that Dryad that's just a 1/1. But the Dryad being joined by a 3/3 Jorn and a 3/4 Quandrix Cultivator means that there's actually quite a clock here, even without the need for the big nasties. There's still a Lier in hand, and that 1 mana interaction we mentioned, this is how you get a leg up on the Izzet deck, by making it care about your creatures when you have this 1 mana interaction to snuff out whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, even with these explosive turns where you're just drawing a ton of cards and cycling through your deck, even just forcing out some of these early answers like this is not completely useless by any means, as Dennis being very, very particular about the kind of mana that he's tapping out. Something that he also mentioned in the interview was the Demon Bolt to deal with some of these early minions as well as bouncing them. So there you go, you're going to get the 4 damage spell onto the Jorn. And it's up to second Sonic to decide if he wants to commit the Veil or not.
I'm a little surprised he put Demon Bolt on the stack first. I thought he might try and play Fading Hope and then see if that got the Snakeskin Veil and then Demon Bolt Jorn. Or you could have copied Demon Bolt, right? Which means that at the best they could have done was maybe save their creature by bouncing it. But instead, you fight a little counterspell battle and all you do is you bounce Jorn to hand. Now, you reset the Snakeskin Veil, but second Sonic, depending on what he draws, might just play Lier, now knowing that your opponent has no counterspells. And that means you've redeployed a large threat and you've unlocked your Snakeskin Veil again. You say, all right, what more removal do you have? So unless you're worried about playing in a Burn Down the House specifically, which I think is a one-of for Dennis, he has 1 Burn Down the House main deck. I think that's the main card you have to worry about here. Otherwise, yeah, second Sonic in a really good spot. I'm sure this is where he wants to be. He leaves the Snowland untapped as well, so he's definitely going for a big play. I have to imagine it's the Lier, because just playing the Jorn again, it feels like too little, but okay, maybe he just goes for 2 creatures. He's happy to tap out.
Yeah, having a think about it, never a bad thing to have that Cultivator enter play. Just get yourself more mana. At least it has that ability which comes straight into play. So even if it does get bounced or something like that, you're getting something out of it as opposed to the Jorn, even though it represents that same damage. So another land for the man. He's definitely having no mana issues this game, but that's what you'd expect from his deck. And he's even going to commit the Jorn, so he's really putting Dennis under the pump right now. This will force guaranteed answers out of Dennis, who realistically doesn't actually have a whole lot going for him. He needs to pick up a little bit of pace here and actually try to find some threatening cards, because at the moment it feels like he's just under pressure and there's not really a whole lot. He's kind of going nowhere fast.
Yeah, he hasn't found an epiphany, right? If he had an epiphany in this situation, the game would be completely different. But he also hasn't been able to, get enough of breathing room, or hasn't had the confidence. He's been playing early interaction, trading cards. But as you pointed out, the trades aren't always the best. Bouncing these cards doesn't really work that well for you. And over time, his opponent is building up a resource advantage, which matters slightly less than it does in the Izzet Mirror, but is still quite telling here, right? Because you can see second Sonic is starting to play more spells per turn, and Dennis can't keep up. When you don't give the Izzet deck room to cast something like Unexpected Windfall in the mid-game, now it starts to get really difficult. He could go, though, for the Galvanic iteration into Unexpected Windfall, reload the hand, reload the mana, try and find that Burn Down the House, because that's starting to be what you need here. Or Epiphany, but you would have to wait another turn, and you may die.
Alright, well, you get the turn thrown back over to second Sonic. Having to think about how he wants to approach this one. Still a fair bit of damage represented for him, but not enough to end the game or anything like that just yet.
Oh, he can kill him. He just has to
sorry,
activate
I didn't see the
land.
Haven, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, and I would, honestly, because what are you afraid of, right? the worst thing that happens to your Haven, burn down the house as a sorcery. Hullbreaker Horror costs too much mana to play. Your opponent can't activate Hall of the Storm Giants. The worst thing that happens is a Demon Bolt. But if they have a Demon Bolt, they have to Demon Bolt something. So I just put it to him. Hey, are you dead? And I'm pretty sure that Dennis is.
Not exactly the game that we were expecting to have here.
He's going to make the play that He has the mana, yeah. He's going to make the play that I suggested. There's the only play he can make is he has to go for it with the double Unexpected Windfall. This will generate enough treasures to cast whatever removal he draws to keep him alive. But the problem here is that he'll only be able to afford the single target removal.
Well,
Syndiclasm's not enough. Oh, Syndiclasm plus Spikefield is, though. Syndiclasm kicked plus Spikefield will kill the Haven. But that's pretty bad still.
Well, needs to try and live this turn, and he does have that Epiphany in hand.
Yeah, he doesn't have many other options. I think he has to go for that and take 6. And then he'll get to untap and he can throw out an Epiphany. But the problem is he'll have to spend his treasures here to do that. So the mana advantage he netted will be mostly gone here. He needs a Kicked, Syndiclasm plus Spikefield, which is all of his mana. So next turn, can he even untap and cast Epiphany? He needs an untapped land off the top now. Really tight spot, but he might be walking that narrow path.
Doing whatever he can. Haven does get taken out, but as you mentioned, both of the cultivators still alive and well, and representing well and truly lethal damage in towards that next turn.
Does he play Jorn second? Okay, we do go for... He could have... Second Sonic could have bluffed for a counterspell. Bluffing can be quite difficult in Arena because obviously unless you try very tricky things, the game won't pause to give you the time to pretend you have a counterspell. It just kind of lets your opponent cast a spell and they know you don't have it. So he deploys Jorn, demands even more specific answers from Dennis back to just we need burn down the house or an Epiphany combo. Expressive Iteration will already have Second Sonic nodding as he basically knows that means he is home and hosed. And there's no way this answers all 3 creatures, so I don't really think there's anything. I don't want to underestimate Dennis, but he got 3 life.
I mean, again, it's just still turns that just don't fill you with a whole lot of confidence, even if he's keeping himself alive.
Gonna foretell Epiphany and just he's just gonna let his opponent misplay potentially, but I doubt that we will see that out of Second Sonic. He can play Lier to then be able to hold up Snakeskin Veil, but he's leaving 1 blue untapped. I guess he can go to combat with Jorn. I would... Surely you want a green mana around. Yep, he's gonna do it that way. Or not at all. Second Sonic making really sure not to throw.
100%. Got 100% this game.
1 green left up. Can't counter this. You can divide by 0, but you die. If it resolves, you unlock Snakeskin Veil, which means you die. Therefore, Dennis is dead. He kind of gives a little nod.
Yep. So there's
Got it.
concede. And Dennis, I mean, kind of going out with a fizzle rather than a bang, if anything, in that first game. It was a very, very slow, kind of crawling approach. But at the same time, you know, when you theory craft a lot of these like intense control matchups, you think about, I mean, at least I do, I think about the big combos and whatnot, but a lot of these games can sometimes come down to just a couple of creatures chipping in damage over time.
Yeah, I mean, if the Izzet decks can beat each other in the mirror with just a couple of bird tokens, you can definitely get the job done with a beefy 3/4 turtle druid, you know? Like, and second, I think that's the difference, right, between Dennis sort of theory crafting and saying, oh, I reckon I'm pretty favored in this matchup. You know, game 1, especially, you might get hard after sideboard, but only Hullbreaker Horror is really dangerous. And Second Sonic, it's like, I have done nothing but train against Izzet matches in the Hyperbolic Time Chamber for a week and brainstorm with all of my boys about how to beat the Izzet deck, and I have constructed this monster to kill, like, these no board, no blocks. Spot interaction is spotty. I need to cast a 4-mana ritual spell. Izzet decks, and yeah, I'm glad that things are playing out kind of the way I expected, because I looked at this deck list and I went, Second Sonic is going to kill all the Izzet players out there. The question is, can he do it post-board? Because things do change for Dennis. He does get access to some much better cards here. He gets to drop some of the stuff that's dead. Maybe even bring in some more threats of his own. Cyclone Summoner is a pretty cool answer to a lot of these creatures. Obviously, you know, you mentioned that bouncing them isn't that efficient, but when you're bouncing them all at once and playing a 7/7, that's a considerable tempo swing even against a ramp deck.
All right, what's changing up here, Pard? Obviously, you got Second Sonic. He's one game away from taking the dub here, and we were talking about how much he can weave in some of these counters. Dennis was having a chat about potentially throwing some more creatures in. So, did you notice anything out of the sideboard, and how are you feeling about these opening hands? I see Dennis is quite happy with his first one.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I actually didn't see too many of the specific cards that get swapped around. The players tend to move pretty fast, and I'm sort of looking between both of them. Maybe I should pick just one player to focus on and see exactly what they sideboarded. But from my presumptions, I would say Second Sonic is still favored after board. I think they both get stronger, as you'd expect, but neither of them seems to have like a real dynamic blowout sideboard card for this matchup particularly. And I'm also interested to see, does Second Sonic actually want that many counterspells, right? Because Plan A of ignoring my opponent worked out pretty well in game 1. So I don't know if you want to switch to playing an interactive battle in game 2. That seems like you're sort of going into the Izzet deck's wheelhouse.
Alright, well, Second Sonic having a bit of a filter through, gonna add himself some more land. Dennis, plenty of land in hand, not having any mana issues this game. But having a tough time kind of seeing how his hand connects to something else. Again, I'm kind of waiting for him to find something off the top, and at least as far as that went for him last game, it was not really super fantastic for him.
Some good news here for Dennis, which is that Second Sonic kept a hand with no green mana on the strength that if he drew a forest, he would be able to go for the super fast horror play. But not only is Dennis again ready, seemingly really prioritizing keeping the removal for those small creatures, but even better for him right now, since he doesn't see any of those targets, is his opponent just not drawing a single green mana, and therefore not having the ability to play anything. Doesn't even have a target yet to divide by 0, as Dennis kind of foretells a spell rather than plays one. And so now we are just going to the late game. At least Second Sonic has tools. He did bring in some of the counters. Disdainful Stroke, super efficient in this matchup. All the spells you want to counter cost 4 or more, including that Windfall. And now we have a forest, so sort of the game begins at on turn 5. This is a sort of no rush game of Magic here.
Yeah, I mean, there are matchups where you would be super sad about that. This one, I mean, there are definitely lines where that extra turn could cost you if you talk about the combo potential of these decks, but I think at least for this game state, the extra turn, it sucks for Second Sonic, but he's still going to continue on his merry way. He's going to try and get that Jorn going for himself.
Yeah, one thing that's quite nice for Second Sonic here is just that he can potentially play multiple spells per turn, but that is one situation where he can't do it, and that's why I'm a little bit surprised he went for the Jorn straight up, right? Because it dies to the... If you play the Quandrix Cultivator there, you get to go and put another forest into play immediately, and your opponent has to have Demon Bolt, which you know they likely have. So I guess he was running out Jorn to try and see if he could get the Demon Bolt, but, you know, Dennis not only has the Abrade, but is clever enough to, you know, not risk the Demon Bolt there. Even though it could be considered known information. Dennis, though, doesn't have that many spells, but with this Windfall, he might hope to get some more. Unfortunately,
yeah,
we got the
counter
stroke.
spell. Lots of counter spells weaved in.
Yeah,
It's something we were having a chat about. And again, it's not that gotcha counter spell, but more of a counter spell which very much slows down your opponent. And I think in this case, that Windfall getting taken out of the equation, it does exactly that. Dennis is kind of dead in the water. He doesn't have any real gas. He's got a ton of mana, but, you know, outside of that, it's all answers in the hand. Whereas Second Sonic, he's still got options open for him. He's still got a couple of answers, and he's got that horror.
Yeah, okay, doesn't go with the Dryad, holds back the divide by 0, smart stuff, knows his opponent's about to get to 7 mana, won't have the Hall of the Storm Giants sort of online yet, since you need the extra mana so it doesn't have to pay for itself, but could have an Epiphany, could have a horror of his own. Second Sonic respecting that one. And now he's got the 3-4 on board again, so there's a clock and the horror backup in hand. So if Dennis commits to dealing with this Cultivator, obviously he doesn't have to commit much with Demon Bolt. But if he tries anything else, or if he taps out, we know that's when Second Sonic is going to go in. And again, that's sort of what I was trying to get at, right? The fact that, okay, the Jorn died the turn before, but the fact that you had Jorn and a stroke, and now you have several more spells in hand, when both players spend the whole early game doing nothing, you expect them to both have lots of mana and lots of spells to play, but Dennis only has lots of mana, so he can't really even make use of all the lands he's drawing, because he doesn't have enough. Oh, actually, sorry, Hall of the Storm Giants does only cost 6 to activate, so it's here and live, but yeah.
I think even seeing something like that, though, what are you thinking as Second Sonic? Because seeing this Izzet turns deck, you're thinking like, okay, he wants to be, you know, improving the quality of his hand. He wants to be cycling through his deck and getting somewhere. So even seeing Hall activated this early is a bit of a tell. It has to be said. At the same time, though, it could be one of those turns where you try to bleed your opponent out a little bit before you commit to anything.
Well, the thing about activating the Hall there is your opponent had 3 untapped mana, and they didn't do anything before their sort of, you know, but basically you're calling out Divide by 0, because Hall of the Storm Giants has Ward 3. So anything else you do, any spell you play or any attack you try would have gotten bounced to your hand by a Divide. But the Hall is like, do you want to lose your only creature or do you want to fall behind in the tempo race? So it doesn't necessarily say anything. I'd say that after countering the Windfall, Second Sonic probably expects Dennis doesn't have a lot of gas. But it's also just a respectable play no matter what from Dennis, because, you know, we saw Second Sonic kind of leveraging the fact that Dennis wasn't pressuring him on board, wasn't pressuring his life total. Dennis is making a concerted effort to lower his life total, threaten his board, to say, well, if you start trying to attack me with all these little dinky creatures, I'm going to at least have you in a spot where you're afraid to die to, you know, Epiphany followed by Hall activation.
Alright, well, I'm actually going to sacrifice the Dryad this time for more mana. So Second Sonic wanting to get himself closer to the Horror, give himself some more options as well. He's got the Divide by 0 sitting there, so this is one of those turns where we're talking about things like Hall or Horror.
Sonic has so much mana now. He's got 8, so he can play Horror plus a Consider. He might wait for 1 more land, right? Having Horror plus 2 1-mana instants is such an ideal spot, but if his opponent commits some mana here, but more importantly commits a card, right? Because Dennis has had time to reload the hand a little. I think Second Sonic is being very respectful of what Dennis might have, but if he sees Dennis go for the Hall of Storm Giants, I think he still can't bounce the Hall, because I believe the ward applies even to the triggered ability of the Hullbreaker Horror. It still has to target, but it would be a window for him to land that spell. And then he only has to worry about Dennis's untapped mana next turn, which probably isn't enough. So we'll see how that actually works out.
Again, Cultivator being difficult, squeezing in those 3 wherever it can, but this is where the Hall gets activated and potentially be used as a blocker, but that's where I'm looking at Horror. I'm looking at 0.
Wait, you can't do that. You can't bounce the ability from the stack, right? It's only spells. He's pausing as though he wants to activate. Yeah, return target spell you don't control. You can't stop the Hall of the Storm Giants activating with Hullbreaker Horror. And once it's activated, it has Ward. So Second Sonic, obviously it's not a bad spot for him, but yeah, it just gave me a small heart attack with that pause. So I wasn't expecting that timing window to matter. I think he's being very careful, right? He understands he's in a great position to maybe advance straight through to round 2. But this Hall of the Storm Giants is giving him pause, right? Because Dennis was low on spells. He's getting a lot of value out of no spells here with just this creature land.
Another a land being added there for Dennis, but again, it's just this position where his hand is all answers. He has the Hall. That's the main point of gas that he's got going for itself.
I think Dennis probably knows, based on that long pause from Second Sonic, that there's a Horror, right? When you're up against the Izzet deck, it could be a couple of things, but against this deck, it's pretty much just the Horror that your opponent would be waiting around for on 7 mana. I guess maybe Divide by 0 on your creature land, but now Dennis, like, he's been offered the opportunity to attack him for another 7 and continue that game plan, right? Second Sonic's like, oh, you wanted to hit me with this creature land? Would you like to hit me with it again? Would you like to tap out and hit me down to 6 life? And now Dennis has to think whether that's really what he wants to do, and how bad it would be if, for instance, his opponent had the Horror ready.
Well, Horror does get thrown out there by Second Sonic, Divide by 0 in response. So we're slowing things down as usual.
But the thing about this is that Second Sonic can just let this resolve, right? And then he can untap. I don't think you want to cast the Consider. The Considers, they're bullets in the gun of Hullbreaker Horror. You don't really need to look at the top card of your deck or anything like that. You need those 1 mana instants to interact once your Horror's down, because the Divide by 0s are going to be too expensive to matter on the next turn cycle. But he's considering, because an extra land would be really good. He finds a Disdainful Stroke, which is likewise pretty cool. But I think, you know, you have to go through with it here. You have to believe in your line that you just initiated. You got the Divide by 0 out of your opponent. You didn't let them, you know, Galvanic Iteration Divide by 0 or anything like that. Now you have to jam the Horror while your opponent's still behind on mana and trust in the Considers. But it does have to survive a full turn cycle, so he looks like he's going to continue to try and sort of wear out his opponent's cards rather than mana.
Well, cards is exactly what Dennis is looking for here when he picks
has
up the
teachings.
teachings. Yeah. So he really wants more gas. He's not satisfied with this hand. He's kind of just been treading water for the last couple of turns.
Yeah.
Wants to try to work himself towards something meaningful.
Okay. You're going to start. It seems weird that you would start by playing Dwari Disruption if you were going to draw any cards this turn cycle. You might just draw a better land, but no big commits. So we're going to play Teachings first. How many cards in the enemy hand? 6. So if you copy Teachings, you get both copies to resolve properly, I believe. It depends how many divide by zeros your opponent can play, I guess. Maybe he just has to throw out the Teachings first and just trust that way he can't be punished too hard by counter magic.
I mean, there's just a lot of cards sitting in Second Sonic's hand that haven't really been touched too much.
Mm-hmm. You can probably guess a lot of them. Dennis is pretty heads up. We've seen him win these mirrors, but okay, Galvanic gets to resolve.
Well,
So
you can't really play around these forever, right? There's just so many counters in Second Sonic's hand. Like, at some point, you need to start making something happen. You can't just keep treading water forever.
Oh, I think the needle is swinging back in Dennis's favor with these last couple of plays. I'm not saying Second Sonic is for sure wrong, especially given he's the one who's been practicing this matchup. But I would have thought you don't want to let Dennis do this. And, you're in a spot now where Dennis is ahead on cards, but you're ahead on mana, but that was where you were on your turn. I guess the idea is that now he gets Dennis to tap out on Dennis's turn, and he's able to slam the Hullbreaker Horror and untap, and he has to trust that the ammunition he's got in hand will see him through everything that's to come from Dennis. And Dennis, I'm sure, is sweating because it's quite possible. Hullbreaker Horror is an insane magic card.
Okay. Well, it does hit the board. There's Fading Hope.
But the thing about this is there's no... We're gonna just get to consider this. Yeah. I'm kind of surprised Dennis even went for it, but I guess you have to. So you have to try, right? He feels as though he's not going to be able to fight through whatever's happening. Gonna bounce that Hullbreaker Horror all the way. But that is kind of the edge, right? Sorry, I didn't actually see there was a blue-red dual land. The second Fading Hope caught me a little bit off guard. I don't think it would have caught Second Sonic off guard because my screen's smaller than his is, but. Yeah, now, I mean, this is sort of what I was talking about, where it's good for Dennis, because Second Sonic, you notice, is not actually advancing his own game plan here. Part of that's not drawing lands, but, maybe there was some line last turn where if you just bounce Galvanic Iteration a hand twice, like, you don't get to have the full value off of that double Teachings of the Archaics, because now Dennis is really in the gas where he hasn't been all game.
So what's he setting himself up for? Is he going to try to just get so much mana where he can try to set up some really strong turn, or is he just going to start trying to chew through some of these bounces and counter spells?
I mean, I think Dennis wants to wait and wants to cast these Windfalls and get in an even stronger spot because he must respect Second Sonic and assume Second Sonic's hand is entirely counter spells, which it mostly is. But he also feels the pressure of the Horror. He feels like if he taps out to Windfall, right, then he gets beaten by Hullbreaker, so he has to go for it. But unfortunately for him, even the double Elrons is not good enough. So Second Sonic, probably breathing a sigh of relief here. He has Disdainful Stroke for 1 and Divide by 0 for the other, for the copy if he wants, which will leave there no iterations, no Epiphanies in hand. There's no iteration at all. He's actually worn his opponent out of resources here. Is he just, okay. Wait, does he have one more mana? Does he have Kraken plus Stroke?
Sure.
Yeah, he does. Sorry, he has 9 mana, so actually he has even better. He has Kraken Stroke, which is the same thing, but you have a Hullbreaker Horror at the end. That's probably the game.
There you go. He's going to throw out the Horror, and he's going to begin with the Stroke.
Okay. Second Sonic, he reads this right. He trusts his opponent, has to go for it, can't get any further ahead in resources, and even though those Windfalls are in hand, those dangerous unexpected Windfalls, there's like one missing turn where Dennis gets to develop them, and that's where we see these decks lose most often, with Unexpected Windfall in hand.
Alright, well, the horror's well and truly out, and unfortunately for Dennis, I mean, not really a whole lot going on for him outside of that Epiphany sitting there, but that's not really going to be able to have any impact. Unfortunately, there's still just more and more answers here for Second Sonic. And he's going to swing for 7 for the first time.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, double Demon Bolt doesn't matter, does it?
There's no universe where you get them both to resolve.
Yeah.
The best line possible for Dennis here involves the creature land, right? Because it has wards, so you can significantly tax Second Sonic's mana, but it depends, right? Because the thing about Hullbreaker Horror, its power only matters based on like the number of instants you can play. But Dennis's deck is built, Second Sonic's deck is built even more so than all the other horror decks we've seen to exclusively power that out, right? There's a ton of 1 mana instants. That's why we see these considers, these Snakeskin Veils. So Dennis might try to call his bluff and assume that some of those cards are like land or Jorn or something else that's not especially good right here. But he'd be wrong. So the way that he might be able to get the horror off the board is if you force Second Sonic to try and interact with the ward creature and tap down all his mana. But even then, I think the interaction is cheap enough, and the fact that the Hall by itself actually just loses to the horror in combat makes that so difficult.
Alright, again, you see this multi-layered interaction. Dennis trying to get the epiphanies off, but they never just quite get there, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And this is usually an interaction that we're used to seeing in the Izzet mirror.
Yeah.
But this time, no epiphany needed here for Second Sonic. He's quite happy to lean back on the power of the horror, which he referred to as the most broken card in Standard right now, I believe. It's showing some real power.
It's pretty close to it, right? Like, it's arguable that you might say Epiphany is more broken, or even Galvanic Iteration or Expressive Iteration probably is the most broken card in Standard, but the most capable of single-handedly winning a game against any opponent is definitely Hullbreaker Horror, and we are seeing how powerful it can be when you build exclusively around it. Snakeskin Veil. We have no end of fuel for this horror. The gas is all there. And, maybe you're thinking now I'll play Double Demon Bolt after I've got my opponent to play out their cards, but Dennis is going to unfortunately learn that there are even 2 more Divide by Zeros, all of which can come down, all of which counter 2 spells each. Like, there's just no way to fight this on mana without having built up a huge stack of treasure, and that is how Second Sonic is going to leverage this ramp that he's used. You know, you can just completely overpower your opponent thanks to Hullbreaker Horror's unique ability.
Yeah, and I think he's really shown throughout this series that his deck is quite comfortable against this Izzet matchup. He's won in 2 very different ways on both of these games, and it's looked convincing both times. He's looked mostly in control. I think he's looking like he's setting himself up to move on to the semis right now.
He gave us a very happy smile right there, Second Sonic. You must be feeling satisfied because you go away and brew a deck like this and you see it show up and do exactly what you wanted it to against a confident opponent. Dennis has probably been, the best performing overall pilot of this blue-red turns deck, but his variant, right, he's the only one not playing creatures still, like actual creature cards in his main deck. He's so vulnerable to this specifically. He's been ripped up by this deck like a can opener, and realizing that all of his cards just match up so poorly here. Even those Demon Bolts, which he kept both games, I feel like might have been a mistake, and maybe he just needed to race for the combo here. But whatever he thought was going to happen hasn't happened, and what looks like actually happening is Hullbreaker Horror plus Hall of the Storm Giants is going to be lethal on Second Sonic's turn, and we are going to be saying goodbye to one of our qualifier champions.
Yeah, so getting a new wave in here. As more and more cards just get bounced more and more often. And as you mentioned, only 10 health there for Dennis. And doesn't really look like he's got any answers to these big boys that keep getting swung at him.
There's 1 blue mana available. Second Sonic is considering the likelihood that a Fading Hope punishes him for going for the immediate lethal. But other than Fading Hope, there should be no fear. And in fact, even if there is a Fading Hope, how much mana does he have? He doesn't have quite enough to activate the Giant Hall and follow it up. I expect we'll see him actually give Dennis another turn here. But he only has... Actually, he can't afford to play Hullbreaker Horror. He can't afford to play the second Hullbreaker Horror plus another spell. So he only has 1 piece of interaction on Dennis's turn, which might be enough, but might not. I genuinely like to see him go for it here, but he is not going to. 2-turn lethal coming up.
Being a bit more conservative, playing a bit safer, perhaps.
To be fair, it asks a lot of Dennis, especially if you cast Mascot Exhibition right here. You could just do it. and say, okay, now I'm not going to ask you to have more spells than me this turn. I'm going to ask you to deal with all this diverse board. But no, he's going to let it ride.
Well, card draw for Dennis.
And the thing for Dennis here is he basically has to go for Epiphany to not lose to the Horror. Because he has to... This is the problem. Dennis has to create a blocker. And all the spells that do that are too expensive. So that means that he has to just start digging for bounce.
I mean, what's the line, right? Is it like Epiphany
No.
into Epiphany?
Well, if he casts Epiphany, it gets destroyed by any spell. So he knows he can't really try for that. It has to be try to cast Unexpected Windfall, get it bounce, cast Unexpected Windfall again. When one of them lands, you dig to Fading Hope or Divide by Zero, and you try to land that. But then it sort of has to be... That's the thing, is like, I don't think any of these players play the cheaper token creating lessons out of their sideboard. So like, if you're relying on Mascot Exhibition as your lesson to create a blocker, that's too expensive. So the line's diminishing rapidly for Dennis, but he's gonna obviously try and see what he can find. Just like in game one, Second Sonic though, just steely-eyed. His focus this game has been incredible, and even when it looks like he's not doing that much, it's because he knows that he is able to dictate the pace. All he has to do is just put this moderate pressure on Dennis and just be ready to like match him move for move, and he's done that beautifully throughout.
We did get a Fading Hope.
He's found it, and Iteration is a great find as well. So oh man, it'd be so nasty to play the second Horror right here. I think that's almost the best plan, right? Because if you divide by zero, you have nothing else this turn.
He held so much mana up, and I was looking at that Flash Horror. And,
okay,
yeah.
Huh.
Just let it resolve.
Well, he can just replay the Horror, right?
But does he have enough mana to replay the Horror? And he can't counter for the spells, right?
No, but whoa. There was mana for Epiphany, right? Yeah, there was.
I thought there was. He had treasures.
Well, there is, and that's why we didn't see the second Horror, right? My instinct was, well, if you play the second Horror, what's the worst that could happen is that your opponent Epiphanies and gets another draw step. But Second Sonic doesn't want you to get another draw step. He's got the Hall of Storm Giants ready to go. So he knows that Dennis still needs to create a blocker, and he needs to create a blocker through Divide by Zero. Dennis also knows this and is trying to find, like, literal anything. But unfortunately, his deck is just not well set up for this precise situation.
Okay, well, digging deeper is going to put an Iteration into his hand.
He doesn't have Iteration plus Windfall, though. Oh, he's going to get to play the mountain this turn, right? He hasn't made a land drop. Okay, he has it. He could keep digging. He's going to get to see 4 more cards and have 4 more mana. It does involve discarding his Epiphany, though, unless he wants to Windfall discarding Iteration, which could work. So if you Windfall, it gets bounced to your hand, and then you don't get to play it again. So I think you have to play Iteration into Windfall here. He's going to do it either on Second Sonic's turn or in response to Horror if there's a Horror end step, which there might be now that there's no Epiphany. I think it makes sense to go for the end step Horror, right? It costs you nothing, basically. Your opponent, the thing you're scared of them punishing your Horror with is Epiphany, and that danger is now past. So Galvanic Iteration now into Windfall, knowing that your opponent can't counter it because they tapped out, and hoping to hit a Divide by Zero most likely. I think there's some left, which will let you reset the Horror to hand. He finds it again. Man, Iteration Windfall is the best play in Standard. It's insane. So we get to bounce the Horror to hand. Now, Second Sonic, though, he will get to untap and go for Hall. So what else is there in the tank for Dennis? There's nothing. He's threatening Divide by Zero out of hand, but he doesn't have it. Second Sonic, again, in a position to call the bluff.
Already had lethal represented for him before. And
actually, wait, he can't even do that because there's no mana to pay for the ward cost. So
he's just got lethal.
He's just got lethal. I'm pretty sure there's nothing that he could even possibly have because the ward is 3, right? Even with, yeah, it's ward 3. He's dead. He literally can't interact with Hall. Second Sonic
has come to the same conclusion.
He's thinking just as carefully. Yeah, he's like, but all of us are like, we don't want to call this too early, especially him. But he's gonna go for it. Dennis says, "Yep," and nods.
Yep.
He goes out with honor. Cut in half, blood fountains out of the Izzet player. Second Sonic's blade is too sharp, honed to destroy the hated enemy. Izzet turns. It has done the job here in the first round.
And did it with style. I think that was a big thing for us, lads, was talking about whether or not this deck coming in from Second Sonic really had the juice to get stuff going, and it seems like right now it has been honed to a sharp little point to do a lot of stuff with that Hullbreaker Horror and Pilski. I think that series just goes to show that, you know, sometimes when you kind of find this cornerstone of a meta, this cornerstone of standard, and you're able to build so many good iterations around it, it really can be a kind of thorn in the side for a lot of these other players to deal with.
Yeah, I think it was a convincing win, very convincing win from Second Sonic moving on to the semi-finals there. He's done very, very well for himself. In both of those games, it felt like Dennis was always kind of living paycheck to paycheck almost, like he didn't have a whole lot of options. He was just trying to go for whatever he could do, and it never felt like he was setting himself up for that turn where it felt like he was about to win the game or setting himself up to win the game. It always felt like he was playing from behind, and unfortunately couldn't quite get out in front.
Yeah, unfortunately for Dennis, he does falter here in the champion stage, so we will not be seeing him move forward into that top 4. But ladies and gentlemen, we have one more quarterfinal to get through here. It is Vacant Lot and Insanity going head-to-head here for the final slot in the top 4 of the champion stage. So make sure you join us after this for more ANZ Champs.
We're seeing our bracket shape up more and more. So definitely keen to see who's going to be advancing.
So now we're seeing, I mean, we've got Consider in hand now for Second Sonic. He's just chipping away. Second Sonic in a really good spot. I'm sure this is where he wants to be. He leaves the Snowland untapped as well, so he's definitely going for a big...
As you mentioned, both of the cultivators still alive and well, and representing well and truly lethal damage in towards that next turn. Seeing this is a turns deck, you're thinking like, okay, he wants to be, you know, improving the quality of his hand. He wants to be cycling through his deck and getting somewhere. So, I mean, not really a whole lot going on for him outside of that Epiphany sitting there, but that's not really going to be able to have any impact. He's won in 2 very different ways on both of these games, and it's looked convincing both times.
He's going to go for it. Dennis says yep and nods.